The announcement did not arrive with a royal procession, a televised address, or the sound of cheering crowds. It came through a coldly worded crown notice that changed one man's identity forever. Prince Harry, the king's younger son, had been stripped of his princely title permanently under an extraordinary enforcement of the 1917 letters patent. In a few carefully chosen sentences, a name carried since birth was severed from the monarchy that created it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone when the file reached his desk. The 1917 letters patent, a royal order first issued to define who could hold the title of prince or princess, had now been used to remove Harry's status permanently. This was not a pause, a voluntary withdrawal, or a ceremonial demotion. It was a final change to the identity his son had carried since birth, ending his right to be legally styled as Prince Harry within the royal structure. The king read the paragraph containing his younger son's name twice. Then he removed his glasses and placed them beside the folder. He did not speak. The silence mattered because the decision touched more than ceremony. It cut into family memory, military service, childhood grief, and the bond between a father and a son who had once stood together through loss. Harry received the secure call in California after the announcement had already been authorized. He listened without interrupting, but his expression hardened when the official confirmed there would be no private grace period and no chance to negotiate the wording. He asked whether the decision could be reversed. The answer came quickly. It could not. One phrase carried the deepest warning: permanent constitutional effect. In plain terms, that meant the order was designed to survive new governments, new palace officials, and even the reign of the monarch who approved it. Harry understood immediately that this was not pressure. It was closure. A second revelation followed. The sealed papers had been drafted, reviewed, and placed inside a restricted royal file before he was told. Charles had been given time to hesitate. Harry had been given none. A senior courtier entered the king's room and asked whether the announcement should be delayed. Charles closed the folder, pressed his palm against its cover, and answered with one word: proceed. That command released the decision into history, but the document had only removed a title. The greater damage would soon appear in the faces of a father, two brothers, and a family that could no longer pretend this was only about protocol. Behind the legal phrasing stood three men whose lives had once been joined by grief, duty, and blood. Charles was not merely the sovereign approving a constitutional act. He was a father authorizing the removal of something given to his son at birth. William was not simply the heir protecting the institution. He was a brother watching the last formal bond between Harry and the crown being cut with deliberate and irreversible precision. Harry felt the loss before he fully understood its reach. The title had linked him to childhood, to Diana, to military service, and to the public identity he carried long before leaving royal duties. It was more than rank. It was the name attached to his memories, his sacrifices, and his place beside William when the brothers still appeared united. Charles carried a different burden. As sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch with final responsibility for the crown, he had to protect the institution from confusion and repeated conflict. As a father, he knew the decision would sound like rejection. William faced the same divide from another direction. The future king wanted clear boundaries, yet he understood that the public would read the decree as proof that their brotherhood had failed. The king walked through a private corridor after signing the authorization and stopped beside a photograph of his sons. He touched the frame with 2 fingers, then withdrew his hand when footsteps approached. The gesture lasted only a second, but it exposed the grief he refused to show in the council room. William studied the draft announcement with his jaw tightened. He supported language that could not be challenged, but each sentence seemed to erase another piece of their shared past. The prince asked whether the wording had to be permanent. An advisor answered that anything softer would reopen the dispute. He said nothing more. Harry stepped away from the secure call and placed both hands on the kitchen counter. Meghan entered, saw the change in his face, and stopped beside him. "They actually did it?" she asked. He nodded once. The Duchess then asked whether Archie and Lilibet could be next. Harry could not answer. The decree named only him, but its silence around the children felt deliberate. He began to believe the crown was separating him from their royal lineage, allowing them to carry a connection their father could no longer display. Meghan reached for his arm, but Harry remained still. The pain explained his anger, yet it did not explain the timing. His title had survived exile, interviews, accusations, and public division. Something else had happened. One private encounter had finally transformed royal frustration into a permanent constitutional response. Every royal rupture has a moment that later becomes impossible to ignore. For Harry, that moment came during a private memorial consultation at Clarence House, when an attempt to discuss his mother's legacy collapsed into an accusation that stunned the room. No cameras recorded it. No official minutes acknowledged its emotional violence, yet those present would later recognize the meeting as the instant when reconciliation died and the machinery behind the 1917 letters patent quietly began to move. Years of strain had prepared the ground. Harry's interviews, security battles, commercial ventures, and disputed accounts of palace life had deepened mistrust. Charles still resisted harsher action because he believed time might soften the anger between his sons. The king chose silence again and again, hoping distance would heal what public argument had torn apart. Clarence House changed that hope. The residence, one of the monarch's official London homes, hosted a private meeting about an anniversary tribute to Diana. Harry demanded an independent role and insisted William could not control how their mother's memory was presented. The prince answered that Diana's legacy could not be used to justify attacks on the institution she had once served. Harry rose from his chair. He accused William of hiding behind the crown whenever truth became uncomfortable. The future king pushed his own seat back so sharply that one leg caught against the carpet. Neither brother looked away. Charles told them both to lower their voices. Harry turned toward his father and said the monarchy only recognized family loyalty when it demanded obedience. The words struck hard. The king recoiled, not as a sovereign under challenge, but as a parent hearing that years of restraint had been mistaken for control. Then Harry crossed the final line. He declared that he would continue using his princely identity wherever he believed it necessary, regardless of palace objections. A constitutional advisor, meaning a specialist who guides the monarch on legal royal powers, stopped writing and slowly looked toward Charles. No one there understood how quickly that sentence would become royal policy. Silence took command. Harry opened the door, paused as though expecting his father to stop him, and left when no words came. William remained by the window, breathing slowly, while the king stayed seated with the abandoned memorial papers before him. Charles finally asked the advisor to prepare every lawful option for separating royal titles from commercial independence permanently. The review began that night, but the decision was not yet complete. Clarence House had supplied the trigger. One final meeting would supply the emotional verdict. As father and son entered a room knowing only one of them could leave with his position unchanged. There were no courtiers beside them, and no advisors prepared to soften the language. Charles and Harry faced one another as father and son, but the crown stood between every sentence. One had come to offer a final route back. The other believed he had been summoned to surrender. Before the meeting ended, a chair would be pushed aside, a warning would be rejected, and the possibility of compromise would disappear behind a closing door. Charles had summoned Harry to a private room at Windsor. The king intended to present one final condition: separate his royal identity from independent commercial and political work, or face formal action against the title itself. Windsor, one of the monarchy's principal royal residences, carried its own pressure, because decisions made there were rarely treated as casual family conversations. Harry arrived expecting a discussion about security and access to royal homes. He stopped when Charles placed a draft constitutional notice between them. The document, a formal statement setting out how royal authority would be used, made clear that the meeting had never been designed as an open negotiation. Harry told his father that the title was not a favor granted in adulthood. It had shaped his childhood, his military service, and the way the world had known him since birth. Removing it, he argued, would punish him for refusing to stay silent. Charles rejected that accusation. The monarch said the issue was not silence but responsibility. Harry could not invoke the crown when it strengthened his position, then condemn the same institution whenever its limits became inconvenient. The king pushed forward a final written undertaking. It would allow Harry to keep the princely designation in private, while suspending its public and commercial use. The agreement required his signature before he left Britain. Harry read the page twice. Then he placed it back on the table without signing. "You are asking me to accept that my identity belongs to an institution before it belongs to me." Charles leaned forward. His voice dropped. "Do not force me to choose between being your father and protecting the crown." Harry stood and moved his chair aside. "You made that choice before I entered this room." The words ended everything. He reached the door, but Charles called his name without the title. Harry froze, understood the warning inside that small change, and walked out without looking back. When the door closed, Charles remained beside the unsigned compromise. The silence had become more decisive than any argument. Beyond that room, legal minds, private secretaries, and the future king were already moving into position. Their task was no longer reconciliation. It was making the coming decision irreversible. Royal power rarely moves through a single hand. A monarch may sign, but advisors define the language. Heirs calculate the future, and constitutional experts determine whether emotion can survive legal scrutiny. Harry believed his fate rested entirely with his father. In reality, the decision had passed through a narrow circle, where sympathy mattered less than precedent. Inside that circle, William's silence carried weight, and Charles's hesitation was becoming a danger to the decree itself. Charles listened as palace lawyers explained the mechanism. The 1917 letters patent, a royal order used to define who may hold princely status, could be applied when royal identity and institutional duty had become impossible to separate. The advisors argued that Harry could not keep the authority of the crown while rejecting the limits attached to it. Permanence became the central demand. A temporary suspension could be reversed, challenged, or reopened by another government. The palace therefore shaped the action as a final royal determination, meaning a decision issued in the monarch's name with no routine path back. The king asked whether the announcement could avoid the phrase, "stripped of the title." His private secretary warned that softer wording would create ambiguity and invite years of dispute. Charles looked down at the draft again. The sentence felt brutal, but uncertainty now seemed even more dangerous. William read the final text in silence. The prince recognized that his brother's name would never again appear in official records, as it had throughout their childhood. He asked whether Harry had received one last warning. When told about the rejected agreement at Windsor, he lowered the page and said any decision must be enforceable and final. Half measures, he warned, would carry the crisis into the next reign. The advisors then removed every shield Charles might have used. William's support strengthened the case, but only the monarch could authorize the crown notice. Parliament had not ordered it. Palace lawyers had not chosen it. The responsibility belonged to him alone. Charles held the pen above the signature line. Camilla waited after the room had cleared, watching his hand remain suspended. The queen consort told him that delay would not protect Harry. It would only deepen the wound when the same choice returned. The king finally signed. He placed the pen across the paper and ordered that no triumphant language appear in the announcement. This was duty, he insisted, not victory. The signature ended the debate inside the palace. Beyond that guarded room, officials began changing records, invitations, and security files, while Harry's oldest public name started disappearing from the life built around it. One official line, invitation, and record at a time, with cold and silent precision. The morning after the announcement, Harry woke as the same man, and yet not the same public figure. His memories had not changed. His bloodline had not changed. His father was still the king, and his brother remained the heir. But official systems had begun removing the word that once connected those facts. The first evidence was not dramatic. It appeared in a revised document on a screen, where his name had been shortened with bureaucratic precision. Harry stared at the new wording while an aide explained what had changed. Royal records, ceremonial lists, official biographies, security classifications, and future invitations were being revised to remove his princely designation. That designation was the formal style allowing him to be publicly named as a prince. The decree did not erase his bloodline or his place in the family, but it removed the title that had expressed both publicly. The aide shifted the document closer. Harry asked how quickly the replacement had been prepared. The answer was clear. The palace had been ready before the announcement. He looked at the blank space where Prince had once appeared, and understood that officials had planned for his absence long before he had accepted it. Meghan watched the silence settle over him. She said the change might become freedom from an institution that had wounded him. Harry answered that freedom felt different when someone else declared it on your behalf. The Duchess reached for his hand, but he kept his eyes on the screen. Another message arrived. A commemorative ceremony in Britain had been placed under review because Harry could no longer attend in the ceremonial position assigned to him. Private military organizations requested guidance on how to identify him. He had believed those honors were tied to service, not rank. Now even that boundary seemed uncertain. Harry opened a box containing military insignia and a handwritten card from Diana addressed to her, "Darling Harry." He gripped the card, sat on the edge of the bed, and struggled to steady his breathing. Meghan remained close, saying nothing, because no reassurance could restore what the paper had removed. Archie then asked why people on television were discussing his father's name. Harry knelt and told him that names could change without changing who a person was. The child looked at him and asked whether the king had changed it. The question broke through his defense. Harry fell silent, then pulled his son closer. Palace warnings had failed to stop the battle, but Archie had forced him to see its cost. For the first time, he considered whether his next move should be another public attack or a private act that ended the cycle. For years, every exchange between William and Harry had been filtered through advisors, legal language, public statements, and memories sharpened by resentment. After the decree, that protective machinery briefly disappeared. One brother called the other directly. There was no secretary listening, no monarch waiting in the next room, and no prepared wording. For the first time since the crisis began, they spoke not as the heir and the former prince, but as two sons carrying the same childhood and opposing versions of its meaning. William made the call after learning that Harry's children had seen the coverage. The prince understood that silence from the palace, meaning the refusal to comment or intervene, could no longer contain the damage. Archie and Lilibet were now hearing strangers debate their father's name, and that pain threatened to pass from one generation into the next. Harry stepped outside before answering. Meghan remained inside with the children while he walked away from the household. William stayed alone in his study. Neither brother had sought approval from Charles or the royal communications team, the staff responsible for managing public messages. No notes would be taken. No witness could later reshape what they said. Harry asked the question immediately. Had William supported the decree? The future king answered that he had supported a final resolution, but he had not asked their father to remove the title. Harry challenged the distinction. He said finality had always been the palace's word for shutting him out. William did not raise his voice. He admitted that the unresolved conflict had frightened him. One day, he said, the crisis would have become his responsibility. It could have poisoned his reign, damaged his children's roles, and turned every future meeting between their families into another royal battle. Harry stopped walking. Then he asked whether his brother still saw him as family, or only as a threat to the monarchy. Silence followed. William finally said Harry would always be his brother, but brotherhood could not guarantee an institutional position. The answer hurt, yet it was honest. When both men began speaking at once, they stopped. Neither filled the pause with anger. Harry ended the call without reconciliation, but something had shifted. He canceled a planned televised interview and chose a personal statement instead. It acknowledged the decision without attacking Charles or William, and asked that the children be protected from a conflict they had never chosen. The brothers had not repaired their bond, but they had stopped feeding the war. Beyond their call, Britain was waking to a front page unlike any it had seen before, and the pain of two brothers was about to become a national judgment. By sunrise, the Crown's carefully controlled announcement no longer belonged to the palace. It belonged to broadcasters, constitutional experts, newspaper editors, and crowds gathering beneath royal gates. Some saw overdue discipline. Others saw a father using ancient authority against his own son. Yet one image captured the country's unease more powerfully than any debate. Harry's face beside a headline in which the word prince had been printed, crossed out, and replaced by silence. Britain stopped to listen. Broadcasters interrupted programs while legal specialists explained the decree's reach. A constitutional precedent, meaning an earlier use of royal power that may guide future decisions, now seemed to be forming. International networks called it the sharpest break between a reigning monarch and his son in modern royal life. Public opinion divided. Supporters argued that titles demanded loyalty, restraint, and responsibility. Critics answered that removing a birth title had turned a family wound into institutional punishment. The argument mattered because it stretched beyond Harry. Every non-working royal could now wonder whether status once treated as permanent had become conditional. Charles watched the coverage in silence. Commentators asked whether he had acted as a sovereign or failed as a father. The king requested that the television be muted, yet he continued studying the images. He could silence their voices, but not the judgment written across their faces. Harry avoided the harshest commentary. Then messages from veterans began arriving. They told him their respect had come from his service, not from the title before his name. He read several twice, and the anger that had hardened him gave way to something quieter. Outside Buckingham Palace, a newspaper vendor raised a special edition bearing the headline, "No Longer a Prince." Beneath it appeared a childhood photograph of William and Harry walking behind Diana's coffin. The front page transformed a constitutional crisis into the memory of two grieving boys whose pain had never left public life. A woman approached the palace railings and placed two white roses beside the gate. One carried William's name, the other carried Harry's. Cameras caught the gesture, and within minutes it spread across live broadcasts. Questions turned to precedent. Could the same mechanism be used against other non-working royals? Anxiety moved through the wider family as commentators tested the decree's possible reach. Harry finally released a statement through his office. He did not attack Charles or William. He accepted the decision, said service did not depend on a title, and asked that his children be protected. The restraint changed the story. As crowds dispersed and front pages faded, the crown remained standing, but father and son were left to face what it had preserved, and what it had sacrificed. In the end, no ceremony marked Harry's final separation from the title he had carried since birth. There was no crown removed, no uniform surrendered before an audience, and no public exchange between father and son. The transformation existed in documents, altered introductions, and the silence before people spoke his name. Yet its meaning was unmistakable. The crown had declared that royal identity was conditional, and Harry had discovered that blood could preserve family history without preserving royal belonging. Harry's removal became complete. Future state records, ceremonial references, invitations, and palace communications no longer carried his princely style. That style was the official form of address marking someone as a prince within the royal system. No automatic process remained to restore it, and no later change could quietly reverse what had been done. The crown defended the decision as a line between hereditary connection and active constitutional responsibility. Birth could place someone near the throne, but it could not guarantee permanent use of royal status without duty to the institution. That principle strengthened the monarchy's boundaries, yet exposed how cold those boundaries became when enforced against the king's son. Charles returned to the room where he had signed the order. The king opened the family photograph he had avoided and left it before him. He understood that the decree had protected the institution from uncertainty, but it had not protected him from grief. Harry placed the revised document inside a drawer rather than tearing it apart. Meghan watched as he closed it, and said he would not spend his life begging the palace to return a word it had taken. She heard no anger in his voice, only finality. William reached his own conclusion. The prince knew the decree had removed an institutional problem, but it had not defeated his brother. Harry still belonged to Diana's legacy, Charles's family, and his past, regardless of what palace language allowed. Harry sat with Archie and Lilibet and told them their worth did not depend on anything placed before their names. Meghan watched the children accept that truth more easily than the adults had. The crown survived stronger, stricter, and emotionally colder. Harry lost the title of prince, but he escaped the space between royal privilege and independence. The removal became both a wound and an ending. There would be no restoration, no constitutional reversal, and no return to the identity he once carried. The monarchy kept its authority. Harry kept his voice. Both sides accepted that the life they shared could never be rebuilt. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.